Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. That are being made that will affect the future, or choices that have been made in the past and where we're at right now. So some pretty cool stuff happened politically. The Democrats kind of got along a little bit, and Joe Manchin is now on the left again. I'm politicizing it, but basically they have a new bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and I like your little comment back. The Inflation Reduction Act is in the long line of naming bills that have nothing to do with what's in the bill.
Yeah, that's so true.
The main goal is to cut pollution by 40% by the year 2030. One of the things I'm only going to comment on that right now because I didn't see it in the rest of our notes, but Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, this is from the article, claimed in their joint statement that the bill delivers enough on climate to cut pollution by roughly 40% by 2030. And then in parentheses, it says, economic modelers at Rhodium Group said that after an initial review of the bill, the 40% figure was plausible, in quotation marks.
Well, they should oversell their politicians. That's their job, right?
Right. But I like that it's roughly 40% and that it's plausible are all kind of, 4%, 40%. It's plausible.
Well, I think it's 25% from 2005 levels is what Rhodium projected, which I don't know how far that we've made it down so far by then or by now, but I'm sure that our emissions have gone down drastically since 2005.
Yeah, just the way that even the cars that chug gasoline and stuff, like the worst ones out there, are much better than they were even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So I have a hard time believing that this is bill. So tell me what exactly actually is in this bill. Should we be concerned? Should we be happy? Is it a good thing that Manchin seems to be on the same page as his party, or is this just another left-wing conspiracy to ruin everything?
I think one of the big reasons Manchin got on board was someone told me that in there's basically a carve out to pass some pipelines that are going to go through West Virginia. So I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't read that, but pork seems to run the show a lot of times.
What?
But it's 369 billion, and it was 555 out of the Build Back Better legislation that failed last year. So I think this is pretty surprising for what Manchin said. There was some analysis that said that it would raise taxes on people under 400,000. I looked at that and I thought the math was a little bit funky. It had some, I would say, moderately scandalous assumptions to make that. So it does look like it's kind of a net on it. It does implement a 15% minimum tax on corporations. And that's something that the OECD countries, like worldwide, I think there's 86 of them or something, basically in the G20 agreed to earlier this year. So it gets in on that point. It implements a tax and it increases it. So I think it was 9.7 cents a gallon and now it's 16.4 cents. And that was a tax on crude and imported petroleum products that expired in 1995, which went previously to fund Superfund cleanup. Has a kind of like a ratcheted up fee on methane emissions. So if you're bad, then it goes kind of up until it reaches 1,500 a ton. So,
isn't all methane bad?
Yeah,
smell that.
I think this might only be on oil and gas, but I'm kind of curious if it relates to agriculture and stuff too, because that would be interesting. It increases the royalty rate. Companies pay for the federal government for oil and gas production on federal land. So one of the companies that this is really going to hit is EOG Resources, because they've got a lot of basically expansion on federal land in recent years. That I didn't see the exact royalty rate, but I think they were talking about 25% from 15%.
Oh,
so
wow!
So big increase. $7,500 tax credit for new EVs and $4,000 for used. Part of the requirement here is that basically for the new EVs, a lot of the components either have to be components of the minerals that go into that have to be made out of batteries and domestically sourced minerals. So it'll be interesting how many people actually get to use this electric vehicle credit, just because there's not enough battery capacity made in the US. Very little is made here. It's mostly made in China. And the materials for this are very low too. So I think this is like Tesla, for instance, sources a lot of their nickel from Canada and the US. And I think that puts them in maybe a better position in some of the stuff. There's a, oh, go ahead.
So when it says the $7,500 tax credit for new electric vehicles, is that talking about like for a consumer or for
consumers?
Companies? Okay, so like if I would have bought a electric vehicle that I couldn't fit in very comfortably because the cars are smaller, even though they're $10,000 more expensive, I could have potentially saved $7,500.
Taken off your purchase price, I believe.
Wow. So I'd still have paid more for less.
So, yeah, and it's kind of interesting too, because I think about this. When you think about like getting EVs to really last a long time and throughout their full life cycle, like I almost think a credit for replacement batteries around that 10-year life cycle when you have to replace batteries, that would be a lot better than taking off the initial sales price. Because if you have it to a point where basically you're buying a $10,000, $15,000 battery for a $5,000 car, I have a feeling that a lot of these cars are going to be trashed. And it kind of goes to our point before we were talking about solar panels, that thinking about where you are in 10 years and what sort of situation it would be in, I think that would really help a lot of these people that are maybe in more marginal income brackets be able to afford replacement of, kind of a battery expense that probably not a lot of them are necessarily expecting.
Yeah, planning for the future is always tough. But I mean, even I'm afraid some of these cars are going to get trashed regardless, because even $15,000 for a new battery is still tremendously less than the $50,000 it cost to buy some of these cars right now. I mean, if I had to choose between the two, like, I could pay $11,000 because I get a $4,000 tax credit, or I could pay $48,000
for a
plus
10-year-old car,
on a new car. Well, I mean, they're selling 10-year-old cars right now for not much under sticker price. That's 10 years ago. So right now, I mean, like literally today at the time of this recording, that would not be a bad idea for the battery replacement. I think that's a great idea. They should definitely hire you. I mean, not too much, just don't need a podcast with
to
you.
Run energy policy.
It looks like so if I'm reading this correctly, this is also includes some funding for the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and prescription drug reform, because that has what to do with?
Well, I guess that's the Inflation Reduction component. So also tax credits for solar panels, wind, battery cars, heat pumps, creates a national green bank, which they hope to stimulate private-public partnerships. Historically, I don't think this private-public partnerships strategy has really worked out that well. So we'll see how that is. But that's an interesting idea that a lot of people have been pushing for a long time. The $60 billion for domestic manufacturing of clean energy technology and critical minerals to really get this going. I don't think money is really the problem right now for this. When you're talking about critical minerals, it's more the permitting process. And basically, like, there's been so much resistance and to having this occur on U.S. lands rather than just realizing kind of the time that we're in and the fact that, you know, mining is needed to produce these minerals so we can actually like get the stuff locally. What we've talked a lot about in the past is it seems a lot of people are maybe a little bit short-sighted, kind of like they were with semiconductors for a long time, just assuming that you can buy this through China and Russia, even though you're trying to go to war with them. So that hasn't worked out very well. But there are some...
What? I thought that's the best time to make
there are some pro-oil and gas elements. Manchin got in a measure that would speed up permitting for energy infrastructure, which could potentially include natural gas pipelines. That the mention earlier about getting pipeline basically approval for one throughout West Virginia is something that I heard from someone else, but didn't read it directly. And then also requiring the Department of the Interior to expand offshore oil lease offerings. So that's been kind of a key sticking point that we've talked about in the past, that the Department of Interior was forced by the courts to do certain things regarding oil and gas leasing for on and offshore. And they basically were kind of like kick rocks. So, yeah, been violating court orders on a lot of those things. And that's I would say a huge kind of change of pace for what we've been on, but it's interesting. I don't really, well, I guess another interesting component to it, which we've seen before, is since this is kind of like a budget reconciliation bill, it has to be budget related items. There's really kind of like a narrow scope for it. And there's this rule called the Byrd Rule, which is kind of named after Robert Byrd, who was a former Democratic West Virginia senator. And it basically says that if it's in the bill, it basically has to be related to the purpose of the reconciliation process in the beginning. So some of the stuff like the healthcare funding and the requirement, for instance, to use domestic minerals and stuff like that, I feel is kind of like out of the scope of this. And so next up, the Senate parliamentarian basically gets to look through this and sees what's legit and what's not, and will X out stuff that's not related. And I could see, you know, some of the things that people really want in this being X'd out for, you know, her correctly doing her job, but disappointing a lot of people in the process.
Yeah, I won't lie. This reminds me of the Colbert Report, where Stephen Colbert hired a tax attorney to set up a super PAC. And then while doing it, like finding out all these things that didn't really matter and the kind of restrictions on them, but this is like the reverse. This is like going the opposite way of like, oh no, we tried to include it in the bill. I mean, we knew it was going to get cut out, but we're just going to call it something.
Such a madhouse. Well, and
oh man, well, California, make sure to check out those tax credits.
All of this rests on Kristen Sinema, the senator from Arizona, being a yes on it, and she said previously in the past that anything that raises corporate taxes is a no for her. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I'm sure. Like, I wonder if we're going to basically have a repeat of last year with this, where Manchin seemed like he might come around, and then Sinema was never on it, and then things got cut out. So then Manchin was off, and it was all kind of a big thing out of nothing. But if it does pass and does go through, like, this is I'd say the huge win for the Democrats in delivering some of the stuff that they talked about over the last, basically Biden's platform coming in.
So let's
big yawn. It's 9:15 here. We're burning the midnight oil. You're on mute.
Dang it, so I didn't mute the yawn. I get it. And I've made all these cool, funny jokes that, well, Brad probably said, no, they weren't cool or funny. And I guarantee he's going to text me on that, because last time I made a joke of Brad, he texted me. I was like, what's he oh, yeah, the recording. So you said this is a big win for, if it gets passed, it's a big win for Democrats. But if this gets passed, is this a big win for the citizens of the United States?
I think it just kind of depends what you're on. I think like
so possibly.
So there's like, I think the imported petroleum products is good. That kind of puts domestic sources in a better position. It's, I'd say the oil and gas industry is kind of mixed on taxing methane emissions. That kind of basically gives the API, the American Petroleum Institute, has been pushing for like a carbon tax as their policy. Been one of the biggest advocates for that. And I think it's just to really reflect, it's nice to like have expectations on that. You can kind of factor it in your economic modeling and stuff like that. Because basically these are capital pools that make economic analyses and then go out and create energy. So it's all kind of like a math game. It's not like greedy bankers like they're portrayed in the movies, but it's
no, they're much worse in real life. Except for all my friends who are bankers.
I think there's some good oil and gas stuff in there that offers certainty of oil and gas. The National Green Bank is a program that people have been talking about for a long time, and that might end up being a really successful program. Tax credits really kind of prolong existing tax credits that were there before. I think that kind of what I said earlier, like I almost think that this would be better spent on the battery replacements. And if it does support domestic mineral, critical mineral production for this and domestic battery manufacturing, like that's a great deal. So that's one component that I like, is not
right.
To kind of qualify for the tax credit, it's supposed to support our domestic industry. So usually you have just government kind of giving handouts for this stuff, free money or whatever like that, no interest loans. And I think this is good because it kind of puts a market incentive for the creation of this. It's, like I think generally the name is funny. I love bill naming these days because it's like comedy show. So I don't really know how it reduces inflation. Well, and to go to the healthcare stuff, the prescription drug reform is a big deal, and I don't know if this necessarily addresses insulin, but insulin prices are crazy, and yeah, so I'd say with most policies, it's wait and see, especially after the parliamentarian gets to it, see what's kind of like in the final bill, and over time see how it kind of rolls out. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Anything that I think that supports domestic production, whether that be renewables, critical minerals, oil and gas, I think is really important for the United States right now, because United States and Canada have such a deep resources here, and given the state that we are, and kind of like this divergence between kind of the Western countries and then the Eastern countries that have all this already set up, I think it's in an important time in history for us to really take a little bit more hold of our, the future that most people or a lot of people could see 15 years ago, and properly recognize it now and do our best to catch up where we can. So that's my 2 cents. Okay. It's kind of like with a lot of these things, it's let's see how it pans out.
Right. Well, since we're so good at predicting the future.
If I were to predict the future, I would say that there's going to be some of the best things that people really like that are pulled out of the bill before it's voted on. And it's either going to kill the bill or get it to barely pass, and there's going to be a lot of buyer's remorse. Not to be a pessimist, but that's...
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.